What was it like to spend the night in Judea in 30 AD? No reservations, no desk clerk, no locks on doors that didn't exist. You've heard the phrase, "no room at the inn." It appears in every nativity scene, every Christmas pageant, every children's book. But what was that inn? Not a lodge with a fireplace and a kind old woman offering warm bread. Not even a crude tavern with straw mattresses and a surly owner. The roadside shelters of first-century Judea were survival stations. Walled courtyards where strangers slept on stone floors among their animals, their baggage, and each other. No beds, no service, no safety beyond what a crowd could provide. If you traveled the roads between Jerusalem and Jericho, between Galilee and the coast, you stopped at these places because you had no choice. Darkness meant bandits. Darkness meant wild animals. Darkness meant death. So you entered a crumbling enclosure with 30 other people you'd never met. You lay down on the ground. You kept one hand on your belongings and tried to sleep through the noise, the stench, and the fear that someone in the shadows was watching your pack. This is what lodging looked like in the world Jesus walked through. No myths, no sentiment, just the truth about how people survived the road. The structure had a name, Khan, sometimes Kataluma. It wasn't an inn in any modern sense. It was a courtyard, 4 walls, sometimes a roof, sometimes just open sky. You entered through a single gate. Inside, dirt or stone floor. A well, if you were fortunate. Mangers carved into the walls for feeding animals. No rooms, no partitions, no privacy. This was the standard roadside shelter across Judea and the broader Near East. Travelers didn't rent beds. They claimed a section of floor. They unloaded their donkeys, tethered them to a post or wall, and spread their cloaks on the ground. That was your bed, your cloak, the same one you'd worn all day through dust and heat. The Khan offered only one service, enclosure. Walls that kept out the wild dogs, the jackals, the bandits who worked the roads after sunset. Beyond that, you were on your own. No innkeeper greeted you. No one brought food or water. In most khans, no one was in charge at all. You arrived. You found space. You stayed until morning. The animals stayed too. Donkeys, camels, goats, whatever travelers used for transport or trade. They were valuable. More valuable often than the people. So they slept in the same courtyard, sometimes in the same corner. The smell was immediate. Dung, sweat, urine, unwashed bodies pressed together, smoke from small cooking fires if anyone had fuel. The air was thick, and it was crowded. During pilgrimage seasons, Passover, tabernacles, these shelters overflowed. Families from Galilee heading south to Jerusalem, merchants moving goods from the coast, diaspora Jews traveling from Egypt, Syria, Rome. They all converged on the same roads. They all stopped at the same khans. So you lay down next to strangers. A family with 5 children. A merchant from Damascus. A laborer heading to find work. All of you within arm's reach. Some khans had raised platforms along the walls, stone or packed earth benches where people could sleep slightly above the animals. But these filled first. If you arrived late, you slept on the ground level, in the dirt, in the straw mixed with manure. There were no doors to close, no shutters to latch. The Khan was open to anyone who entered. That meant safety in numbers. It also meant no control over who those numbers were. You kept your belongings under your body. You didn't sleep deeply. You woke at every sound. Footsteps, voices, the scrape of something being dragged, because theft was constant. A traveler's entire wealth often fit into a single bag. Coins, tools, extra clothing. If someone took it while you slept, you had no recourse, no authority to appeal to, no way to recover it. So you didn't trust. You didn't relax. The con wasn't rest. It was survival. A place to wait for daylight so you could move again. And this was normal. This was how people traveled. This was the system. Not hospitality, not comfort, just walls and a roof. And sometimes not even that. Judea's roads weren't paved highways. They were packed dirt tracks worn into the limestone hills by centuries of feet, hooves, and wagon wheels. They connected Jerusalem to Jericho through 17 miles of descending wilderness. They linked Galilee to the capital through Samaria's contested territory. They ran west to Joppa and the Mediterranean ports where goods arrived from Rome. These weren't optional routes. They were the only routes. And because a traveler on foot could cover roughly 15 to 20 miles in a day, less if the terrain climbed, less if you carried weight, less if you traveled with children, the cons appeared at predictable intervals. One day's walk. That was the spacing. You left Jerusalem at dawn. By afternoon, you were halfway to Jericho, descending through the Wadi Kelt. By evening, as the canyon shadows deepened and the temperature dropped, you reached the Khan, or you didn't. And then you slept in the open. But most didn't risk it. The road to Jericho was infamous. Narrow passes, stone outcroppings, caves where men could wait unseen. Jesus told a parable about it. A man traveling that road, stripped, beaten, left for dead. The audience didn't need explanation. Everyone knew what happened on that road after dark. So the cons became mandatory stops, not choices, necessities. Archaeologists have traced these sites, foundations of stone walls, collapsed cisterns, worn feeding troughs carved into rock. They cluster near water sources, springs, wells, seasonal streams, because travelers needed water, and so did their animals. The Khan at the Wadi Kelt, the shelters along the ridge toward Bethlehem, the waypoints on the ascent from the Jordan Valley toward the Judean highlands. Geography determined where you stopped, not preference, not convenience. The land forced the route. The route forced the rhythm. The rhythm forced you into these enclosures with whoever else the road had swept along that day. Pilgrims formed the largest crowds. 3 times a year, Jewish law required adult males to appear in Jerusalem for the feasts, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles. Thousands came, tens of thousands during Passover, Galilean families walking south for a week, diaspora Jews sailing into Joppa, then moving inland, Judean villagers converging from every direction. They all needed to stop. They all needed shelter. The cons couldn't hold them, not remotely. So people overflowed into the fields. They slept under trees, in caves, against walls. They camped on the outskirts of towns, hoping someone might have space. This is what Mary and Joseph entered. Not a quiet countryside, not an empty village. Bethlehem during a Roman census, at a time when travel was compulsory. Every descendant of David's line ordered to register in the ancestral town. A village of perhaps 300 people suddenly swelling with hundreds more, maybe thousands. Every house full, every guest room occupied, every available corner claimed. And somewhere in that crush, a woman in labor. The Khan would have been chaos. Bodies pressed together, no space to lie down, much less to give birth. So they went elsewhere, not to a barn in the modern sense, not to a separate structure, to the lower level of a village home, where the animals were kept at night, where the air was warmer, where there was finally room. That's what the text suggests. Kataluma, the guest space, was full, so they used the space that wasn't. The manger wasn't a stable decoration, it was a feeding trough, carved into stone or built into the wall. A practical object in a practical space, and that space was the best they could find. Not because they were rejected, because there was nowhere else. The geography of desperation, a crowded road, a mandatory stop, a town beyond capacity. This was travel in 30 AD, not adventure, not exploration, necessity, endurance, and the hope that when the sun set, you'd find walls to sleep within. Most khans had no owner. No one lived there. No one managed the space. No one greeted travelers at the gate or collected payment for entry. The structure simply existed. A public shelter, built by a village, a regional authority, or a wealthy patron generations earlier. Maintained by no one, used by everyone. You arrived, you entered, you left. Some khans operated differently. A local family might live adjacent to the courtyard. They controlled access to the well. They sold fodder for animals, barley, hay, dried grasses. They sold food to travelers who had none. Bread, dried fish, lentils, not out of kindness, out of profit. You paid for water from their cistern. You paid for a spot near the fire. You paid for grain to feed your donkey. The prices weren't fair. They didn't need to be. You had no alternative. This wasn't an inn with posted rates and competition down the road. This was the only shelter for miles. The family knew it. You knew it. So you paid what they asked. Or you slept outside the walls. Some families went further. They charged for entry itself. A coin to pass through the gate. A fee to claim floor space. Others offered protection. You paid them to watch your belongings while you slept. Whether they actually protected anything or simply refrained from stealing it themselves was unclear. The line between host and extortionist was thin. But this wasn't universal. Many khans remained free, open to anyone, uncontrolled. And that created its own problems. Because if no one was in charge, no one enforced order. No one intervened in disputes. No one removed the drunk traveler shouting at midnight. No one stopped the theft. The only law was the crowd. If enough people objected to someone's behavior, they might drive them out, or they might not. You were on your own. The cultural expectation of hospitality existed, but it applied to invited guests, to travelers welcomed into a private home, to relationships of honor and obligation, not to strangers in a public courtyard. A family who opened their home to a traveler took responsibility for that person's safety. They fed them, they protected them, they treated them as sacred guests. This was Xenia, the ancient Near Eastern code that made hosts and guests accountable to each other. But the Khan operated outside that code. You weren't a guest. You were a user of public space. No one owed you anything. The wealthier families, those who owned homes large enough to include a kataluma, an upper guest room, extended real hospitality. A traveler with a connection, a letter of introduction, a shared acquaintance might find shelter there. A private room, a meal, safety. But most travelers had no such connections, so they went to the Khan, and they dealt with whoever else was there. The family charging for water, the merchant guarding his goods, the pilgrim trying to sleep through the noise. No one cared about you. No one had reason to. You were a stranger. You would be gone by morning, and so would they. You spread your cloak on the ground. Dirt or stone or straw that hadn't been changed in weeks. That was your bed. You lay down among 30 strangers, maybe more. Bodies pressed close enough to hear breathing, close enough to smell the road on their skin. The animals were closer still, donkeys tethered along the walls, goats huddled in the corner. A camel, if a wealthier merchant had arrived, folded awkwardly near the gate. They made noise all night, shifting weight, chewing, the wet sound of cud, the sudden bray that shattered any chance of sleep. The air was thick, dung both fresh and old, urine pooling in the low spots of the courtyard, sweat from bodies that hadn't bathed in days, smoke if someone had built a fire. No ventilation, just the open sky above, if the structure even had a roof. Fleas moved through the straw. Lice spread from person to person. You felt them crawling before you fell asleep. You woke scratching. Disease followed. Dysentery from contaminated water. Fevers from parasites. Infections from cuts that had no chance to heal in the filth. You didn't think about disease. You thought about theft. Your pack was under your head. Your coins, if you had any, were tied to your body. You kept one hand on the bundle at all times, because theft didn't happen in broad daylight. It happened in the dark, when exhaustion finally pulled you under. When someone crept close and slid a blade through the cord holding your bag. You woke to find it gone. Your tools. Your food for the next 3 days. The small amount of money you'd saved. No one saw anything. No one would admit to seeing anything. And there was no authority to appeal to. No guard, no magistrate. The nearest Roman garrison was miles away, and they didn't intervene in disputes between travelers. You lost it. That was the end. So you didn't sleep deeply. You woke at footsteps. You woke at voices. You woke when someone stood too close. Privacy didn't exist. A mother nursed her child 3 feet from a stranger. A man urinated against the wall in full view of the courtyard. Families argued. Couples fought. You heard everything. You saw everything. Children cried through the night. Babies woke hungry. Sick travelers groaned. Someone always coughed, a deep, wet sound that echoed off stone. You tried to sleep through it. You couldn't. By the 3rd hour of darkness, your back ached from the ground. Your legs cramped. The cold seeped through your cloak. You waited for dawn. You watched the sky. You counted the hours until you could leave. Because the Khan wasn't rest, it was endurance. A place to survive until morning. A place to avoid being killed on the road. Nothing more. This was normal. This was how people traveled. This was the only option. And it's why hospitality mattered. Why a family opening their home meant everything. Why being offered a room, an actual room, with a door, with space away from the crowd, was a gift that carried moral weight. Because the alternative was this: the courtyard, the animals, the strangers, the sleepless night on the ground. The khan wasn't an inn. It was proof that the road was hostile, that survival required walls, that comfort was a luxury most never experienced. And in 30 AD, this was the best most travelers could hope for. But there was another system, one that ran parallel to the khan's, one that mattered more: private hospitality. In a world where public shelter meant filth, theft, and sleepless nights, opening your home to a traveler wasn't optional kindness. It was moral obligation. Refusing shelter could bring shame on your entire family, on your village, on your name. The cultural code was ancient, rooted in Torah, rooted in the stories every child knew. Abraham welcoming 3 strangers at Mamre, Lot protecting travelers in Sodom, the widow of Zarephath sharing her last meal with Elijah. Hospitality wasn't charity, it was righteousness. So wealthier families built their homes with space for guests. A kataluma, an upper room, separate from the family's living quarters. A place where a traveler could sleep away from the animals, away from the chaos. If you had a connection, a mutual acquaintance, a family tie, a letter of introduction, you might find shelter there. A real bed, a meal, safety. But even families without extra rooms made space. They cleared the lower level, the area where the animals slept at night, where the air was warmer, where stone mangers lined the walls. It wasn't ideal, but it was private. It was protected. It was better than the khan. This is what Mary and Joseph were seeking, not the public courtyard, not the chaos. A kataluma, a guest room in a relative's home. But Bethlehem was full. Every guest room occupied, every family already hosting travelers. So they were offered the next best option, the lower level, the space with the animals. Not rejection, not cruelty. The best available shelter in a town beyond capacity. Because the alternative, the khan, was worse. Far worse. Especially for a woman in labor. Hospitality wasn't about comfort. It was about survival. About recognizing that the stranger at your door might be you tomorrow. Might be your son. Might be someone you loved, far from home, in need. So you opened your house. You shared your food. You gave up your space. Not because you wanted to, because you had to. Because the road was brutal, and the khans were unforgiving, and someone had to offer something better. The inns of ancient Judea weren't romantic rest stops. They were walled courtyards where survival, not comfort, defined the night. No beds, no service, no safety beyond what a crowd and 4 stone walls could provide. Travelers slept on dirt floors among strangers and animals, one hand on their belongings, waiting for dawn so they could move again. The stench, the noise, the theft, the disease, this was normal. This was the only option for most. Understanding what these shelters actually were changes how we read the story. No room at the inn wasn't just an inconvenience. It was the difference between chaos and shelter, between exposure and walls, between danger and something slightly less dangerous. Hospitality wasn't optional kindness in that world. It was the only thing standing between travelers and brutality. If this kind of historical reality interests you, if you want to see the world as it actually was, subscribe. There's more to uncover. And let us know in the comments, what part of ancient travel surprised you most?